Disinformation! Disinformation! Who gonna help me understand this information? Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and the FBI? Of course they bloody well will. Hello there, you 5.9 million wonders. Thank you for joining me on this voyage towards truth as we zigzag through the mind of the machine towards the great burgeoning source. That's what I'm doing anyway. See you Wednesday if you can make it. Hey, listen, guess who I chatted to? Max Blumenthal from Grey Zone. We talked about misinformation, disinformation, all of that kind of stuff. Talk about how Bill Gates put a lot of money into media organizations that potentially gives him the ability to manipulate and direct content. Mark Zuckerberg said that stuff, didn't he, on Joe Rogan? Not to mention the Hunter Biden laptop. Where did I put my bloody saucy old dirty old stinky old laptop? Oh, Dad! There's a lot going on out there. That's why me and Max Blumenthal had a conversation about who's directing this information. What does it mean, really, misinformation and disinformation? Is this just a new propagandist term, a new manipulation of language? It's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose these new terms themselves indicate an alteration of the narrative. And there's so little trust in mainstream media, the state and big business that we have to remain discerning. Max Blumenthal's been called all sorts of stuff, like, he's a proper whack job conspiracy theorist. But honestly, when you listen to him talking, I really think that 20 years ago, he'd have just been a New York Times journalist. He would have been like basically a mainstream journalist doing scoops and stories on, hey, there's corruption, boss. Do you remember when journalism used to be that? Well, it ain't anymore. Have a listen to this conversation. You're going to love it. And if you don't subscribe yet, subscribe right now. I'm really desperate to get to, not desperate, I'd like to see 6 million. Turn on the notification bell as well, because in case the algorithm's up to no good, right? Anyway, stay to the end of this and let me know in the comments what you think of it.
As a part of this enhanced control by the security state over the public, we're seeing the rise of this what they call a counter disinformation industry or counter disinformation experts. And they pose as civilian actors, they pose as organic, but the reality is they are a facet of the security state as well, the intelligence apparatus. The FBI is a part of this, of course. And so many people, especially on the right, are freaking out because Mark Zuckerberg disclosed that the FBI essentially told him to suppress any discussion on Facebook of the Hunter Biden laptop, which was a trove of corruption and criminal behavior that I think could have actually altered the course of the election, which means they were manipulating US politics. An unelected security apparatus was seeking to guide the outcome of the election away from a Trump victory. That's what's apparent through Zuckerberg's disclosures. But the FBI has been doing this for a long time. There was actually a hearing in the House on supposed foreign interference, Russian Facebook ads and China, Iran, and Venezuela hacking the brains, all the official enemies hacking the brains of Americans. And I think it was Seth Moulton, one of these, pro-war Democrats. He started asking all the principals. It was a Zoom meeting because it was 2020. All the principals of the tech industry, what kind of collaboration are you having with the FBI? And one after another, they said, we meet with the FBI on a weekly basis. We have ad hoc meetings, and sometimes we just can't wait for those meetings when we need to decide on whether to take down a tweet or a post. So we'll consult the FBI on that. So that's been out in the open for years. But it's also clear that there are elements beyond the FBI that are telling social media companies what to do. And we can talk about my own experience at the Grey Zone with this because it's pretty extensive. We're right in their crosshairs. Why? Because this isn't about fighting disinformation. It's about suppressing and silencing anyone of any prominence who disrupts the establishment narrative, particularly when it comes to foreign policy and U.S. interventionism, but also on COVID and other issues. And these elements exist within the intelligence services, but they often operate through what we call cutouts or front organizations, one being the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. They all have these seemingly anodyne, banal names that make them appear serious and kind of objective and neutral. And if you look at who's behind them, who's funding them, it's the US State Department, it's the British Foreign Office, which actually oversees MI5, MI6, and it's industry. It's the tech oligarchs. It's Bill Gates, who has plowed $325 million of his fortune into media in the past 20 years and is increasingly funding this new fact-checking industry, which for some reason never checks the lies that are told by establishment bureaucrats like Anthony Fauci or Bill Gates himself. They're always trying to guide the public into obedience and support of official policy and narratives. That's who's behind this. And they don't want their fingerprints on it when they're taking on an alternative outlet like the Gray Zone. This whole disinformation industry is actually about protecting the greatest propagators of disinformation of our time, our elected leadership and the security state that has lied us into war after war after war. And they're running around calling people fascists while they're funneling billions of dollars into a Ukrainian military that has integrated literal neo-Nazi battalions like Azov and Aidar into its ranks. The irony cannot be overstated, except when I do state that irony, I run the risk of being censored.
Yeah, so don't overstate it. Don't even state it at all. Understate it. Allude to it. Do a poem about it. Do a drawing about it. It amounts to, do you think then, Max, a kind of grooming, priming, prepping, nudging, in addition to whatever it does in terms of it seems that, you've acknowledged, of course, that coronavirus is a real thing. People, these are the impacts of coronavirus on the lungs. This is how the virus works. No one's saying that there's no such thing as coronavirus. It's evidently a phenomenon. But the response to it was expedient. The response to it was profitable. The response to it increased the ability to regulate, and it could be used to track an agenda to control populations, as you said already, that previously were kind of off-grid or unbankable, I think was the term you used. And broadly speaking, going forward, it makes it difficult. Gareth here, the producer of our show, says that, like 10 years ago, if you wanted to prevent a social uprising, the image of the military on the street is what presents itself. Now it's kind of stuff that can be shut down from digitally. You can just control people's assets. You can control people's ability to socially interact. And it seems that that's the trend that we're being offered. That's what's being presented to us as the solution to the problem of living. And again, to a point I made earlier, Max, tribalism used to be sort of like the kind of model, and of course, via the culture war, it's still a sort of an idea that's kind of prevalent. And as you have demonstrated in COVID, this kind of this sense of division and identity with like your status around vaccine. But now it's like there's our microbial threats, existential threats, ideological threats are all kind of being sort of what do I want to say, dramatized and brought to the forefront of our consciousness in order that we can be presented solutions that limit our freedom and increase, broadly speaking, compliance. I think you've explained that to us in a way that sort of seems pretty clear. So, mate, unless you've got something to say right away, I would say, where do you think this is heading? It seems likely that it's conceivable that operations like yours and even ours will kind of get shut down, and we'll sort of face we'll face threats. What kind of response can we have, and where do you think this is heading from an establishment perspective, and what should be our response as a population and as alternative media providers?
Well, yeah, that's the key question, is where do we go now? Because we can go somewhere now. But politics are very confusing right now. Labels like left and right are increasingly less cogent. People are more divided and fractured than ever before. It's just like supply chains. And we're moving towards a long-term economic crisis, which always leads to political uprisings of one form or another. So the pandemic restrictions, which I think had the ultimate effect of enhancing the control of a global transnational elite, and weakening the power, the political power and economic power of the global working class, it only postponed the inevitable. We talked about the uprisings of 2018 and 2019. Those uprisings are returning. And in the midst of an energy crisis in Europe, which was brought in through deliberate decisions to wage, to inflame this proxy war in Ukraine, and then to basically boycott Russian gas and oil, Germany is bringing troops back onto the street. I mean, we saw them bring troops onto the street during the pandemic as a show of force. We saw troops on the street here in Washington, D.C. Germany has plans to bring them back in October. The Economist magazine, which is sort of like the official publication of global billionaires, has warned of a winter of riots. Germany's interior minister has also warned of radical riots coming. They knew this was coming, but they're doing this anyway. And so they're preparing for more repression, and the public is out there in the streets protesting, whether it's the Dutch farmers protesting this elite top-down transformation of food systems that is being carried out in an undemocratic way to answer a real problem, climate change, whether it's them or people in Puerto Rico protesting mass privatization and neoliberalism, or people in Panama protesting the rising prices of food. I see it all as one thing. And what we're doing and what you're doing, Russell, is part of that rebellion that's taking place around the globe that will take form as it goes along. And we just have to we have to keep a clear perspective on what's being done to us. That this is not about that this is not about fighting disinformation. It's about enhancing control. Yeah. It's not about fighting viruses, although viruses are real. It's about dividing us and controlling us. And even if if things seem hopeless, and they really feel hopeless in the United States, our experience at the Gray Zone, where people have just come to us to support us against all of these censorship attempts, just strangers coming out of the woodwork, sending me letters to my house with small checks for $10 or $20 to encourage me to keep doing what I'm doing. That's really what's keeping me and so many other people in alternative media going. And I've seen colleagues like my friends at Mint Press or Consortium News, who do a lot of the same kind of work the Gray Zone does. They've had their PayPal accounts shut down without any warning or explanation, and had thousands of dollars pilfered, held. This is happening to so many alternative outlets, but they, continue moving forward with massive public support because people increasingly know that they're being lied to. Trust in the media as a whole, which really is synonymous with mainstream and corporate media, is at an all-time low. And I see that as a good thing. Yeah. And when you came online, Russell, came on YouTube and started racking up millions of views, immediately you started getting attacked by the same people who've been attacking us. And that's a badge of honor. It means you're doing the right thing. And it means that the people are behind you.
Wasn't that fantastic? Do you feel a little bit smarter already? You certainly are. I know you are, and you were smart when you got here. Hey, listen, if you enjoyed that video, have a look at either of these. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Please sign up to my mailing list, particularly if you want to see me perform in the United States of America, which I will be doing soon if such things become plausible and possible. More important than any of that, please stay free.